A dog, a gun, and a war scene. The streets of New York were quieter than usual that night, the kind of quiet that made John Wick's instincts hum with unease. It wasn't just the usual calm before chaos. This felt unnatural, wrong, like the city itself was holding its breath. John sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, his dog, Ghost, curled up by his feet. He ran a hand through his beard, staring at the gun on the table in front of him. He had promised himself he was done with this life. The high table was shattered, the blood debts had been paid. There was nothing left to fight for. Then the sky cracked open. A boom unlike anything he'd ever heard shook the entire building, rattling the windows, sending car alarms blaring through the city. Ghost lifted his head, ears perked, growling low. John was already on his feet, grabbing the gun, muscle memory taking over before his mind even had time to process what was happening. He stepped onto his balcony, and what he saw nearly made his heart stop. A massive tear had opened in the sky, like reality itself was being ripped apart. From that rift, dark metallic objects began descending, fast, silent, predatory. The sky, once speckled with stars, was now swarming with shadows. Then came the first explosion. A building 3 blocks away erupted into a fireball, debris raining down onto the streets below. The world fell into chaos in an instant. Cars crashed, people screamed, running in every direction, as the alien ships descended upon the city like vultures circling a dying beast. John had seen war. He had been war. But this was something else entirely. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Wick, you seen this? John exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the horror unfolding before him. Yeah, Marcus. They're not just here to scare us. They're here to wipe us out. As if on cue, one of the alien ships hovered lower, its sleek, otherworldly surface reflecting the fire and destruction below. The air vibrated with an unholy hum, like something was preparing to strike. Ghost barked, a sharp, desperate sound. John didn't hesitate. He grabbed his weapons, strapped on a bulletproof vest, and checked the magazine of his pistol. The world was ending, but if these things thought they could take it without a fight, they were about to learn what it meant to cross the wrong man. He scratched Ghost behind the ear, his voice calm, steady. Let's go. With that, John Wick stepped into the night, into a war unlike any he had ever known. The hunt begins. John Wick moved through the ruined streets of New York like a ghost, silent, precise, and deadly. The city he once knew had become a war zone. Fires burned unchecked, sirens wailed in the distance, and the scent of burning metal and flesh hung thick in the air. His boots crunched against broken glass as he stepped over an overturned taxi, Ghost padding cautiously beside him. Bodies littered the sidewalks, some human, some not. The invaders had wasted no time. They weren't mindless monsters. They were hunters. The first time John saw one up close, he realized just how outmatched they were. It stood in the middle of Times Square, scanning the wreckage with cold, insect-like precision. Its exoskeletal armor gleamed under the flickering lights of shattered billboards. No visible eyes, just a smooth, jet-black mask with thin, pulsating blue veins running across it. It moved with inhuman grace, muscles coiling beneath its armor as it surveyed the bodies. Then it turned its head. John froze. For a moment, neither moved. Then the thing let out a low, clicking sound, a noise that felt like a judge passing a sentence. It knows what I am. Before John could react, it moved, fast. It lunged forward, its bladed arm slicing through the air where John had stood a second earlier. But John wasn't just a man. He was the Baba Yaga. He flowed around the attack, his instincts taking over, rolling to the side, firing twice. The bullets hit, sparking off the thing's armor, but it barely flinched. John cursed under his breath. That's not good. It came at him again, this time faster. John ducked under a sweeping strike, driving his knife into the creature's side. It let out a shriek, not of pain but irritation, before backhanding him with enough force to send him crashing into a pile of debris. Stars exploded behind his eyes. Ghost snarled, baring his teeth, ready to leap. John wiped the blood from his lips and exhaled sharply. All right then. With a flick of his wrist, he reloaded. If bullets weren't enough, he'd have to get creative. The alien charged again. This time, John met it head-on. The assassins joined the fight. Gunfire erupted in the distance. The underground world of assassins had learned to stay hidden from the wars of men. But this was different. John had fought trained killers before. He had battled the best of the best. But the creatures hunting them now weren't mercenaries or hitmen. They were executioners. And the high table? Gone. Their rules, their order, it meant nothing now. The only law that remained was survival. As John maneuvered through the crumbling remains of a luxury hotel, he saw a familiar face. Cassian, the former bodyguard of Gianna D'Antonio. Bloodied, panting, still standing. Cassian turned to John, a wry smirk barely forming beneath the exhaustion. Didn't expect to see you in hell, Wick, John reloaded. Then you don't know me very well. No words were needed after that. The assassins of the underworld had just been given their greatest contract yet. Kill every last one. A deadlier enemy reveals itself. But just as John began to think they had a chance, something changed. The skies above split open once more, and from the shadows of the invasion ships they came. Bigger, stronger, more intelligent. The first wave had been hunters, but these were commanders, and they had only one mission: eliminate the one human who refused to die. John Wick was no longer just a man. He had just become the most hunted prey in the universe. Nightfall. The city was dying. Smoke and ash choked the skyline, turning the once glorious lights of New York into dim, flickering embers. The night wasn't just dark, it was devoured. The invaders had taken the sky, their massive warships blotting out the stars, casting long, suffocating shadows over the ruins of the world below. But in the depths of the city, beneath the wreckage and the death, a different kind of darkness moved. John Wick. He ran through the skeletal remains of a collapsed building, his breath steady, his steps silent. Ghost followed close, his body low, ears pinned back, both hunter and hunted. The city was their battleground now, and every shadow held death. A faint, unnatural hum vibrated through the air. They were close. John pressed his back against a crumbling concrete wall, gripping his pistol tightly. The alien weapons were different. They didn't fire bullets. They didn't rely on heat. They cut through reality itself, warping light and sound with each shot. One hit and you didn't just die, you ceased to be. He checked his magazine. 3 rounds left. Not enough. Never enough. Ghost let out the softest growl. They're here. The hunted becomes the hunter. The first one moved like a phantom, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, silent as the grave. Its armor pulsed with an eerie blue light, shifting between liquid and solid with each movement. John exhaled. He stepped into the open, raised his gun. Bam! Bam! 2 shots hit the creature dead center. It staggered, its armor rippling, absorbing the force, but not enough. The third bullet ripped through its head, spraying thick, black liquid across the pavement. The body collapsed, twitching violently. That's when John felt it. The air changed. Before he could react, a shadow loomed behind him. Too fast. Something cold wrapped around his throat, yanking him back. He barely managed to twist his body, slamming his elbow into the creature's ribs. It hissed, an unnatural, guttural sound, before throwing him across the street like a rag doll. John crashed through the windshield of a wrecked car, glass shredding his shoulder. Pain exploded in his ribs. Ghost barked, a furious, desperate sound, and lunged at the alien. Teeth met metallic flesh, and for a brief moment, the creature was off balance. John didn't waste it. With a grunt, he yanked a combat knife from his belt and drove it up into the alien's throat. The thing let out a terrible, gurgling screech before collapsing. John rolled over, panting. This wasn't a battle. This was a slaughter. And if they didn't adapt, fast, humanity was done. The underground resistance. John regrouped with what was left of the assassin world beneath the ruins of the Continental Hotel. Cassian, Sophia, a few survivors. A bloodied, battle-worn Bowery king stood at the center of it all, gripping a rusted crowbar like a warlord from an ancient time. His left eye was swollen shut, his coat torn, but the fire in his voice hadn't dimmed. "These things ain't the high table, John," he spat, adjusting his grip. "They ain't men. They ain't got no rules, no honor, no price. They're here to wipe us off the board." John wiped the blood from his mouth, reloading his gun. "Then we changed the game." Sophia, crouched beside two of her Belgian Malinois, narrowed her eyes. "And how the hell do we do that?" John looked at the weapons they had gathered. Bullets, knives, broken rifles. Nothing that could go toe-to-toe with an intergalactic execution squad. But then he remembered something. The way the alien's armor rippled when it was shot. The way it twitched when it absorbed damage. They weren't invincible. They could be broken. He looked at the Bowery King. "We need to find out what kills them." The room fell silent. Then Cassian grinned. "Then let's go hunting." The city belongs to them now as John and his team prepared their next move. The war above raged on. Entire city blocks vanished in waves of blue light. The sound of human screams mixed with the aliens' sharp mechanical clicks. But something else had begun. The commanders had arrived. Not just hunters, not just foot soldiers. These were the elite, the ones sent to end the last resistance. And their mission was clear. Find John Wick. Kill John Wick. Erase John Wick from existence. As the first of these nightmare creatures descended from the sky, scanning the ruins with an unfeeling, analytical gaze. John was already moving, because he knew the truth. There was only one way this ended, with blood. Blood and steel. The city was dead. What remained was a graveyard of fire and shadows, streets littered with the charred remains of cars, bodies in buildings that once held life. A war was raging, but not one of armies. This was a hunt, and the greatest hunter on Earth was now the hunted. John Wick had survived countless wars. He had fought assassins, crime lords, the high table, and every ghost that had come clawing from his past. But this was something else. The aliens weren't just warriors. They were executioners, merciless, methodical, relentless. And they were learning. The first wave had been hunters. The second had been commanders. And now, the true nightmares had arrived. The first strike. John's boots pounded against broken asphalt, Ghost running beside him, his panting barely audible over the distant sounds of gunfire and inhuman shrieks. He had 2 magazines left, a combat knife strapped to his thigh, and a half-broken rifle slung over his shoulder. Not enough. Never enough. The elite had come down from their warships like gods descending upon a dying world. They weren't clad in armor like their lesser counterparts. Their bodies were weapons themselves, smooth obsidian-like carapace, shifting and adapting with every movement. Their limbs stretched unnaturally, their forms flickering in and out of visibility. They weren't just here to kill, they were here to erase. John had seen them do it, how they disassembled people alive, breaking them down molecule by molecule, leaving nothing behind but a blackened stain on the earth. And now one of them was watching him. Perched atop a collapsed skyscraper, motionless, its featureless black faceplate reflecting the burning city. It didn't move like the others. It didn't lunge. It waited. John knew why. It wasn't here to fight him. It was here to study him, to see what made him different, to understand why he refused to die. John exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "You picked the wrong man." The thing vanished, and then the world exploded. A dance with death. John dove to the side just as a blade of energy sliced through the concrete where he had stood. The air rippled. A figure blurred into existence. A twisted mockery of human movement, fluid and unnatural, closing the distance between them faster than any assassin John had ever fought. John fired. Bam, bam, bam. The bullets hit, but they didn't penetrate. The creature absorbed them, its armor shifting like liquid, the impacts rippling across its body. Then it was on him. John rolled back, bringing his knife up just in time to block a razor-sharp appendage meant to carve him in half. Sparks flew as metal met something worse than metal. For the first time in his life, John Wick was outmatched. The alien moved without hesitation, without waste, predicting his movements before he even made them. It wasn't just fighting him, it was anticipating him, and it was winning. John barely managed to parry another strike, twisting his body to avoid a second blade from the creature's other arm. A split second slower, and his spine would have been severed. He gritted his teeth. "You have to adapt, John." With a sudden burst of movement, he threw his rifle like a club, momentarily disrupting the creature's balance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. John shifted low, fast, brutal, and drove his knife straight into the thing's leg joint. This time it screamed. Not a human scream, a sound that twisted the air, making the city itself seem to tremble. John didn't hesitate. He ripped the blade free and stabbed again, this time into what he hoped was a vulnerable point beneath his chest plating. The creature staggered back, its body flickering, struggling to maintain its form. John Wick had just done what no human had before. He had made one of them bleed. The cost of survival. But he didn't walk away unscathed. His arm was sliced open to the bone, his ribs bruised from the sheer impact of the alien's strikes. Blood dripped from his fingers as he staggered back toward the ruins of a subway station. Ghost limping beside him. Cassian and Sophia were waiting in the underground shelter, eyes widening when they saw him. "You look like hell, Wick," Cassian muttered. John wiped his face. "You should see the other guy." Sophia stepped forward. "Did you kill it?" John shook his head. "Number, but I heard it." Silence fell. For days they had fought these things, dying in the shadows, watching entire factions of trained killers get ripped apart like insects. And now for the first time, there was proof that they could be wounded, maybe even killed. Cassian exhaled, a dangerous gleam in his eyes. "Then we've got a chance." John leaned against the rusted wall, gripping his side, his body screaming in pain. A chance. It wasn't much, but it was all they needed. The war has only just begun above them. The invaders regrouped. The commanders studied the footage, analyzed the data. The target, the one they called John Wick, had done the impossible. He had wounded a prime executioner. The logical course of action was escalation. More units, more power, a full-scale eradication of the resistance. But deep in the heart of their leader, in the cold intelligence that had wiped out entire civilizations before, something new began to take root. Not fear, curiosity. John Wick wasn't just a man who refused to die. He was a man who fought death itself. And for the first time, the invaders hesitated. Into the abyss. The tunnels stretched before them like the open jaws of a beast, swallowing the last remnants of light. The air was thick, stale, heavy with the scent of rust and something worse, something rotting. The underground had always been a refuge for those who didn't belong in the world above. But now it belonged to something else. John Wick moved in silence, his injured arm wrapped tightly in bloodied gauze. The pain was constant, but pain was a familiar companion. It reminded him he was still alive. Ghost followed close, his nose twitching, his body tense. Behind them, Cassian, Sophia, and the remnants of the resistance walked carefully through the ruins of an old abandoned subway line, weapons drawn, their footsteps barely making a sound against the cracked tiles. They had fled here after John's last fight with the prime executioner, knowing the surface was no longer safe. The invaders had adapted. They were coming for him, and he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. The depths of hell. The deeper they went, the worse it became. The walls were coated in something organic, a thick, pulsating film that glistened in the dim emergency lights. The veins of it ran like tree roots, stretching along the ceiling, winding through rusted pipes and cracked walls. Sophia ran a gloved hand over it, grimacing. "This isn't normal." John exhaled. Nothing is anymore. Cassian swept his rifle ahead, his face unreadable. It's not just for show. This stuff is alive. John knew what he meant. This wasn't just a hideout, it was a nest. Ghost suddenly froze, ears pinned back, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. John felt it too, a shift in the air, a presence that hadn't been there a moment ago. Sophia's hand hovered over her holster. We're not alone. Then the darkness moved. Something worse than death. The thing that emerged from the tunnel ahead wasn't like the ones above. It was taller, its frame elongated, grotesquely twisted as if it had been growing in the dark. The armor that coated its body was no longer smooth and perfect, but cracked and fused with the living walls around it. It had been changing. Its eyes weren't just black, they were hungry. John raised his gun instinctively, but before he could pull the trigger, the thing spoke, not in its own tongue, in English. You? Bleed. John hesitated. The voice wasn't natural. It was stolen, jagged, and wrong, as if the creature had ripped the words from a dying man and forced them through its own throat. Then it lunged. John fired immediately, the first bullet punching through its chest, but it didn't stop. The thing didn't need organs. It moved like liquid, twisting around John's attacks, slashing at him with elongated blade-like fingers. Cassian and Sophia opened fire, but the creature barely flinched. It was stronger, it was smarter, and it wasn't alone. From the shadows behind it, more began to emerge. Bodies half-formed, still dripping with the organic filth of the nest. Sophia cursed. John, we need to go, now! John didn't argue, they ran. The betrayal. They didn't stop running until they reached a maintenance chamber, barricading the door with whatever they could find. The distant sound of inhuman shrieks echoed through the tunnels, growing louder. They wouldn't hold for long. John turned to Sophia and Cassian, catching his breath. They're evolving. Sophia wiped blood from her face. We can't fight them like this. We need an exit. Cassian nodded, pulling up a hacked map of the city's underground grid on his wrist device. There's an old maintenance route that leads to the East River. If we can get there, we might be able to escape topside. John looked at the others. Then we move. But before they could act, a gunshot rang out. Cassian staggered, his body twisting as a bullet tore through his shoulder. John spun around and saw the traitor. Bowery King's second-in-command, Malik, stood near the exit, his pistol still smoking. His face was twisted with guilt and fear. I had to. His voice was weak. They gave me a choice. John's grip tightened around his pistol. You made the wrong one. Malik didn't get to reply, because the door behind him exploded inward, and the creatures swarmed. The descent into madness. The fight was brutal. John didn't aim. He moved. His bullets found flesh. His knife found throats. His fist cracked against alien bone. Ghost ripped into one of them, its thick black blood spraying across the walls. Sophia's dogs tore another apart. Cassian, wounded but still standing, fought like a man with nothing left to lose. The chamber became a slaughterhouse, but it wasn't enough. They were endless. John knew it, felt it. They had to run. And then he saw it, a collapsed wall, revealing a massive drop into what had once been the deepest part of the subway system. A pit of darkness. There was no way out, but they had no choice. John locked eyes with Cassian and Sophia. They jumped, and the abyss swallowed them whole. Into the unknown. John hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself to his feet. The others landed behind him. They were alive. But what they saw ahead of them, deep within the earth, hidden beneath the ruins of a dying city, wasn't human, not anymore. It was a structure, massive, ancient, pulsing with light and energy, buried beneath the world for centuries, maybe millennia. The aliens hadn't brought their war here. They had always been here. John exhaled, wiping blood from his face. Well, shit. The sleeping gods. The abyss was alive. John could feel it. A pulse in the air, a silent vibration crawling up his spine. The vast cavern stretched in every direction, filled with monolithic structures of alien origin. Massive spires of obsidian-like stone rose from the ground, laced with veins of glowing blue energy. They weren't ruins, they were waking up. John adjusted his grip on his pistol. His body ached from the fall, but there was no time to rest. Sophia and Cassian stood beside him, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning the darkness. Ghost and Sophia's dogs moved silently, sniffing the air, uneasy. Cassian exhaled, his voice tight. "What the hell is this place?" Sophia ran her fingers along the strange surface of one of the structures. Not just a nest. Her eyes flickered with realization. This is a tomb. A prison. The lost city. They moved cautiously through the ancient structures, their footsteps echoing through the cavern. Everything was too perfect, too calculated. The angles of the buildings, the way the glowing energy pulsed in unison, like a heartbeat. John wasn't a scientist, but he knew control when he saw it. This place had been built with a purpose. They reached what looked like a central plaza, a circular chamber with an altar-like structure in the middle. In the center stood a monolithic slab, covered in etchings too alien to decipher. Sophia wiped sweat from her brow. "I've seen something like this before. The glyphs. They're a warning." Cassian narrowed his eyes. "A warning for what?" John stepped closer, running his gloved fingers over the stone. The symbols twisted, moved, shifted beneath his touch. And then, the ground shook. A deep, inhuman growl rumbled from beneath them. Ghost let out a snarl, his fur standing on end. Sophia's dogs whimpered, ears pinned back in fear. Cassian took a step back. "John!" The walls trembled as something began to rise. Nightmares unleashed, the monolithic slab split apart, revealing a cocoon of writhing black tendrils, a shape imprisoned inside. The air grew thick, electric, as if something was pressing down on them, suffocating reality itself. And then it opened its eyes. Eyes that weren't just black. They were voids, devouring the light, pulling it inward. A deep, unnatural whisper filled their minds, bypassing sound entirely. "You have come too far." John barely had time to react before the creature tore free. It was taller than anything they'd seen before. Its form an impossible mixture of bone and metal, organic and mechanical fused together in a design not meant for human understanding. Sophia raised her gun, but the thing moved before she could fire. With a single swipe, a wave of kinetic force blasted them backward, slamming them against the stone walls. John hit the ground hard, his head spinning. Ghost let out a pained yelp. The entity descended from its prison, its elongated limbs twitching unnaturally. It didn't just move through space, it warped it. Cassian groaned, forcing himself up. "Tell me that thing's not a god." John spat blood, staggering to his feet. "Looks like we're about to find out." The price of war. The thing didn't attack immediately. Instead, it studied them, measured them. It spoke again, not with sound, but in a way that dug into their skulls. "You are different. You fight." John steadied his aim, finger tightening on the trigger. "Yeah, we do." Bang! The first shot slammed straight into the creature's head. The impact made it stagger, but it didn't fall. Instead, it laughed, a horrible, distorted, inhuman sound that shook the cavern. John fired again. Double tap, chest, head, no hesitation. Cassian followed suit, emptying a clip into its center mass. Sophia pulled the trigger without mercy, but the thing did not die. It absorbed the bullets, fed on them, and then it moved. John barely dodged the first strike, rolling to the side as the ground exploded where he'd been standing. Sophia and Cassian dove for cover. The monster raised a clawed hand. The cavern itself responded. The walls cracked, the tunnels collapsed, and then came the others. From the shadows, more figures emerged, not like the soldiers John had fought before, but something worse. Silent, watching, waiting. John exhaled. "Fuck." The only way out, there was no winning this fight. Not here, not now. John scanned the chamber. There, a passage leading further into the depths. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only option. Sophia, Cassian, move! They ran, bullets flying, dodging tendrils that lashed out from the darkness. Ghost snarled as he lunged at one of the creatures, buying them precious seconds before following at full sprint. The path ahead narrowed, leading them into a corridor filled with strange metallic structures. As they sprinted through, something clicked, a mechanism activating. The walls lit up, revealing more symbols. But these weren't like the warnings before. These were instructions, a map. John memorized it instantly. Sophia panted, checking her magazine. "Where the hell are we going?" John didn't answer immediately because he recognized something in the symbols. Something he had seen before. Something from long before the war began. "We're going to finish this." Cassian frowned. "What does that mean?" John met his gaze, eyes dark, a storm raging beneath them. "It means we just found out where they come from." The final piece of the puzzle. The truth was buried deep beneath the earth. The creatures, the war, it hadn't started when the invasion began. It had always been here. And the symbols on the walls told John everything he needed to know. A way to fight back, a way to end this. Sophia exhaled. "We're gonna need more bullets." John checked his pistol. One magazine left. He chambered around. "Then let's go shopping." The final war. The ancient corridors whispered secrets as John Wick led his team deeper into the abyss. The air was thick with the scent of something old. Not just age, but decay. The walls pulsed, glowing faintly, as if alive, as if watching. He tightened his grip on his pistol. One magazine left. Not enough. Not even close. Sophia reloaded beside him, her hands steady despite the chaos. Cassian checked their six, scanning the shadows for movement. Ghost growled low in his throat. The enemy was near. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. Sur la final, strong, hold. The passage led them to a colossal chamber, unlike anything they had seen before. An underground cathedral, built for something not of this world. In the center stood a massive, pulsating gateway. A monolithic structure carved from an unknown material, humming with an eerie blue glow. Strange alien symbols covered its surface, shifting, morphing, as if responding to their presence. Beyond the gateway, they could see stars, a portal, and standing before it, the enemy. The creatures had assembled, hundreds of them, towering figures cloaked in shadow, their black eyes gleaming in the dim light. Their weapons hissed and crackled, energy coursing through their strange, unnatural forms. At the front, a warlord, taller than the rest. Its armor was different, etched with markings that looked ancient, even by their standards. It stepped forward, raising a hand, and the entire room fell silent. Then it spoke. "Your kind was never meant to be here." The voice slithered into their minds, cold and final. John exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Yeah, well, we're full of bad ideas." War in the dark. The first shot rang out. Then hell broke loose. Cassian and Sophia dived for cover, unloading everything they had into the incoming horde. John moved like a ghost, weaving between pillars, every shot hitting its mark. Head, chest, reload. Head, chest, reload. The creatures were fast, their movements inhuman, twisting unnaturally through the air. Plasma rounds scorched past them, burning into the ancient walls. Ghost and Sophia's dogs lunged into battle, tearing into the enemy with savage ferocity. Cassian took a hit, shoulder shot. He grunted, rolling behind a broken structure, still firing. John reloaded mid-run, grabbing a fallen alien's weapon. The thing twitched violently before going still. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He just fired. The alien gun roared, releasing an arc of pure energy, cutting through the enemies like a blade through flesh. The air stank of burning ozone. John didn't stop. He never stopped. The Warden awakens. The enemy kept coming. For every one they dropped, 3 more emerged from the shadows. Sophia gritted her teeth. "We can't hold this position forever." Cassian wiped blood from his face. "Then we take the high ground." But John wasn't listening. His eyes were locked onto the warlord. The thing was watching him, studying him, testing him. And then it moved, faster than anything John had ever seen. 1 step, 2. Then it was there. The impact sent him flying, his back slamming into a pillar, cracking the stone. His vision blurred for half a second, and that half second almost killed him. A massive blade slammed down where his head had been. He rolled, barely dodging, feeling the shock wave rattle his ribs. The warlord loomed over him, its black eyes voids of nothingness. "You are an anomaly." John spit blood onto the stone. "You have no idea." He moved first, faster, meaner, smarter. The warlord swung, but John was already inside its guard, slamming the alien rifle under its jaw and pulling the trigger. Boom! The warlord staggered. John didn't stop. Kick, pivot, strike. The creature caught his wrist mid-swing and threw him like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard, rolling with the momentum. Sophia and Cassian were still fighting for their lives. Ghost lunged at a smaller alien, snapping its throat. John exhaled, his fingers curled around his last pistol. And then he saw it, the control node near the portal. A device, a fail-safe, a way to end this. The final move. John was out of options. He ran, not away. Toward the node, bullets whizzed past. Plasma burned the air. The warlord realized too late what John was doing. It lunged after him. John slid beneath its strike, came up and emptied his entire magazine into the node. Crack! The device exploded. A shock wave ripped through the chamber. The portal destabilized, its once stable glow turning violent, chaotic. The creature screamed. Sophia grabbed Cassian, pulling him back as the entire structure began to collapse. The warlord roared in fury, lunging at John one last time. John caught its blade midair. His body screamed in protest, but he didn't let go. He leaned in, his voice low, final. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Then he twisted the blade, forcing it into the warlord's chest. The thing staggered back, black blood pouring from the wound. John didn't wait to watch it die. He turned, sprinting toward his team. Escape and fire. The entire chamber was falling apart. The portal was imploding, sucking in everything. They ran, dodging debris, leaping over broken pillars. Ghost led the way, his movements sharp, desperate. John felt the heat at his back. Too close, too damn close. And then, they made it. They burst into the tunnels just as the gateway collapsed behind them, sending a shockwave that nearly took them off their feet. Then silence, nothing left. No enemy, just them. Alive. John exhaled. His hands shook slightly. The war was over, or at least, this one was. Aftermath. They reached the surface before sunrise. The city was still burning, but the sky was clear. For the first time since the invasion began, the air smelled clean. John looked at Sophia. She looked at Cassian. Nobody spoke, because there was nothing left to say. They had won. And for John Wick, victory had always been the hardest thing to survive,